My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Mother Goose, Video 10, Jill of Jack and Jill fame. So here is my novella, John and Mother Goose, The Carnival of Tales, a picture of John and Mother Goose on the cover. Here's the summary. While driving his granddaughter home from daycare, John suddenly finds himself standing in the midway of a carnival of Mother Goose fairy tales. He's greeted by Jack of Jack and Jill fame, who tells John that Mother Goose is expecting him, as she has a role for him to play. But what does Mother Goose want? And why does she think John is a writer of detective stories? And why, when she meets John, does she greet him as almost a long-lost son? And for that matter, why do so many of the fairy tale characters have different stories that they want John to write for them instead of the ones in which they have lived for hundreds of years? John's not a mythical creature. He's only a human after all. But can he save the Mother Goose Carnival? Can he solve the mystery of the vanishing fairy tales? Now, John is introduced to the Mythicals, who are the actors in the Mother Goose Carnival of Tales, as a writer of detective books, who is here to help Mother Goose solve the problem of why some of the stages are bare, why some of the mythical characters have disappeared. So, as he strolls along the midway with Mother Goose, John watches the nursery rhyme of Jack and Jill. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. After the performance, Mother Goose introduces John to Jill, and as the two of them sit in the character tent, Jill begins to tell the story she'd rather act in instead of the story she's been acting in for hundreds of years. Let's start with the performance, and then we'll go on to Jill's preferred story. It starts on page 14. Okay, here we are. Let's walk around, John, says Mother Goose, and watch some shows on the midway, and I'll introduce you to some of the performers. They'll all be willing to talk with you. They're a very friendly lot. The faded sign says Jack and Jill went up the hill. 3 stagehands come out on the stage. One stagehand places a wooden bucket at one side of the stage, and the other 2 place a well on the other side. Jack comes out on stage, lifts up the wooden bucket, and turns it upside down. Jill comes out on the stage, and Jack shows the upside-down bucket to Jill and then points to the well across the stage. Okay, I have to move on a few pages here, leaving a number of other items out. Jack and Jill mime climbing the hill as they move across the stage. The climb is so strenuous for both of them, as their faces show, that I strain my muscles involuntarily to try to help. When they reach the well, Jack puts the bucket in and with straining muscles draws the full wooden bucket back out. On the way down the steep hill, Jack suddenly slips, and the wooden bucket rolls across the stage. Jack tumbles over and over as if he's falling down. Immediately, Jill slips on the steep slope and comes tumbling after. Mother Goose assures me, as we watch the 2 characters tumbling, that she will introduce me to Jill later on. Okay, now let's go back, moving around in this chapter, to Jill's story. So this is after the performance. John goes with Jill to the character tent. They sit there, and John is supposed to ask Jill about any clues she might have to the disappearance of some of these nursery rhymes, but she just starts to talk. And here's what she says. I'm an independent woman, John, a sculptor, in the story that I want you to write. I make marble statues, which I sculpt. Here, let me show you what I mean. I'm talking to Jill of Jack and Jill fame, We were together in the character tent after the show, and she's showing me this scene as we sit and talk. Jack tells me that you're a writer, John. You're exactly the person I need, though Jack need not hear of this till he hears it from me. Here I am on top of the quarry, John, the marble quarry at Carrera. The coffee that Jill has provided turns out to be bitter and cold. Italy, John? You've heard of it? The home of Carrera marble? The same that Michelangelo used to use? Here I am drilling the holes for the dynamite charge. I do all my own work, you see, from the quarry to the sculpting to the opening night presentation of the work of art. Oh, look, here I am plunging the plunger. See the dynamite explode? See the block of marble sliding down the hill? I'm a young and successful sculptor, John, a female, on my own, world-renowned. In John's mind, he hears a line, Jack and Jill went up the hill. Oh, and here's a flashback. You don't mind flashbacks, do you, John? I'm not aware of what kind of books you write. There's a car parked in the parking lot. See the marble sliding down? In a moment, you will see the car squash flat. And in it, there's a lunchbox with some sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. And beside it, on the seat, is what looks like a recipe book. And the car and the thermos of coffee and the sandwiches, of course, and the recipe book as well, belong, you see, to Jack. Okay, that's scene one that Jill tells John about. And there's a second scene as well. Excuse me. And here it is. So, here I am in my studio, John. Jill is showing me a scene. The other fairy tale characters sit and chat. In the character tent, the summer night is warm and there's the moon. This would be, if you're counting, the second scene. Surrounding me in my studio in a loft in mid-Manhattan. I sip my cold, bitter coffee as we sit and watch the scene. In New York, John? It's a borough. I assumed that you would know. Surrounding me, as I was saying, there are busts cast in clay, but your readers can't tell yet, because each bust is covered by a cloth. I'm working on a new one, John, for a commission that I've received. I went to boarding school with a girl from a tiny country at the furthest end of the map. A revolution when she returns. Her father is president for life. He wants his face to be on a mountain, just like the Rushmore presidents are. And his daughter persuades him to give the commission to me. So I'm making a model, John, from a photograph of my best friend's father. See the jewels that encrust his uniform? See me modeling them with my hands in the squishy clay? I am working as your readers absorb the scene. But then I stop my modeling, John. I throw my scalpel down. I lurch around the room. Insanely, John, I am tearing off the claws. Then we, your readers, John, see all the models in one wide scene. Every model they have modeled has the face of Jack. John hears a line in his mind, and Jack got, and home did trot. Oh, and there's a flashback here as well, John, of Jack and I in court. He is suing me for squashing with my marble block his car. He was parked in a restricted zone. I was blasting in a restricted zone above. Neither one of us was aware that we were breaking the law. The judge sneers that we make a good pair, that we're two of a kind, birds of a feather, that for 2 cents he'd lock us up together and swallow the key. We hear, the readers hear, John, and see the blast again. Jack is running towards the car. A piece of marble dents his safety helmet. Jack loses a part of his memory. His mother used to make his sandwiches, but she has passed away. He's used her recipe every lunchtime since she died. Now, his mind has holes like cheese, John. Swiss, I'm sure you'll write. And the recipe book for the sandwiches was squashed in the car. Well, that's scene 2 that Jill wants John to write. Okay, let's go on to scene 3. As they sit in the character tent and Jill explains to John the story she would rather act in than the one she is acting in. So, here I am on Mount Rushmore, John. You know that mountain, I assume. It's much more famous than Italy or Manhattan, so you must have heard. Jill and I find ourselves in the scene. The presidents are an awe-inspiring sight. I'm here doing research, John. Scene 3, if you're keeping count. I want the head of my best friend's father, the head of the president for life, to rival the 4 American presidents in prestige. Oops, lost my place. Suddenly, John, I slip. See me tumbling? See me fall? I'm dangling by a rope from the end of a nose. The rope is beginning to fray, John. I hold it in my hands in the hopes that someone will reach out a hand and rescue me. John hears a line in his head, with vinegar and brown paper. That's a line from Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill. Oh, and another flashback here, John. Jack and I don't get along. He has to hitchhike to work, you see, at the quarry. And with the loss of the recipe book and his memory, remember the cheese? He doesn't enjoy his lunches at work at all. But just before I left John on my Rushmore research trip, I found a lunchbox just like the one he used to leave in the parking lot in what used to be his car. And I made some sandwiches, John, like my mother used to make, and some coffee with my own special blend, and sent it to him, John, with a tender note. So moved is he by the sandwiches, John. I always start with a slice of cheese. By coincidence, it's Swiss. Who would believe? And lettuce, radicchio lettuce, which not everyone would use, but especially by the coffee, so close in taste. Who would know? To what his mother used to make. I'm always precise, John, when I count the pieces of shell, that he has followed me to Mount Rushmore. See him emerge from a tourist bus at the moment when I'm dangling from the rapidly fraying rope. John hears another line in his head. Jack and Jill went up the hill. Or should it be Jack, do you think? I'm an independent female who is dangling from the nose and fears to fall. Perhaps Jack should be the sculptor. No, that wouldn't work at all. Well, maybe the brakes on the tourist bus fail and I rescue him somehow. I would still be measuring the nose, but I wouldn't fall. I see the tourist bus in the distance. I have a sense of impending disaster. Surely the brakes on the bus are faulty. My ears insist there's something wrong when I hear them squeal. John hears another line in his mind. To fetch a pail of water. Well, that is my story, John. I have an ending in mind, of course, so what do you think when you write this will happen to us, John? To Jack and Jill and our no longer children roles. Shall I get you another coffee? Finish your drink and I'll get you some more. It's time for us to move on, John. I've given Jack a substantial role from the 8-line snippet of Jack breaking his crown. I'm so sure, John, that our audience will agree. Let it cool before you swallow. It's always too hot, I find, though the recipe for the blend they got from me. I haven't told Jack yet. Perhaps you can tell him. Show him your writing, be my advocate, make my case. He must have sensed that I'm growing restless. My tumbling isn't what it was. I get so tired of enacting the tumbling after fall. So that's Jill's story, the story that she would like to act in, rather than the story she's been acting in for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. John's quite surprised when he sits down to talk with Jill in the character tent, excuse me, as John has understood, after listening to Mother Goose's speech in the to the mythical characters, that he's supposed to interview them to see whether they have any clues as to the continuing disappearance of the other characters from the Mother Goose Carnival of Tales. To John's surprise, Jill says that she understands he's a writer and launches into a story that she would like John to write for her. What Jill seems to be saying is that she no longer wishes to be the character in the fairy tale of Jack and Jill who went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, but wants to have an entirely different story in which to perform and presumably in which to live. She seems to understand that although mythical characters cannot write mythical stories, human writers can. It's interesting that Jill includes a part for Jack in the story that she hopes John will write for her, although she asks John not to tell Jack about the story until she's ready to tell him herself. It's interesting, too, that Jack told John, when he first met John, that he wants to tell John something that he does not want Mother Goose to overhear. It'll be interesting to see whether Jack has a story in which he would rather act than the familiar fairy tale of Jack and Jill, who went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, and whether he, Jack, will include Jill in a new story which he would like John to write and which he would like to act. So stay tuned. There's more to come. This is my novella, John and Mother Goose, The Carnival of Tales. It's found on Amazon. You can also find it on my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com. And on my website, johnpassfield.ca, there are 2 free books, a planning notebook, which I wrote as I was planning and writing this novella, and the journal, which I wrote while I was polishing this novella. All kinds of things are discussed in both books. So have a look at johnpassfield.ca if you're interested. Lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.